Recording started. Great. Okay, well, we're going to get started. And hello, ACS, SF, San Francisco Bay community. Welcome to our September 2022 Fourth Tuesday speaker event. I'm Susan Hopp, board member, and with me is one of our new board members, Susan Sherman. So first, an introduction to American Cetacean Society. For any of you that are new, ACS began in 1967 and is the oldest nonprofit dedicated to the protection of whales, dolphins, porpoises, and their habitat. And we do this through education, community engagement, and awarding grants toward marine research. We appreciate your donations in support of our mission. They fund our grants and they support our expenses around these monthly talks. It's very easy to donate on our website if you haven't donated at time of registration. So thank you all. Now we are recording this session and we encourage you to put your questions in the Q&A. And after the presentation, we'll do our best to get to all of them. And the title of tonight's talk is Ecology is Written in the Symphony of Baleen Whales. Our speaker is at the forefront of acoustic research of whale communication and the emerging field called acoustic ecology. John Ryan is a biological oceanographer with the Monterey Bay Aquarium Research Institute, also known as MBARI. His research explores a variety of oceanic life forms from microscopic plankton to gigantic whales and the ecosystem processes that shape their lives. John Ryan received his Bachelor of Science degree in biology from the University of Massachusetts in 1988. He worked in ocean science and terrestrial wildlife biology before pursuing graduate studies and subsequently received his Ph.D. in biological oceanography from the University of Rhode Island in 1998. His graduate research focused on phytoplankton ecology in the northwestern Atlantic and was supported by fellowships from the Office of Naval Research and NASA. John began a postdoctoral fellowship at Monterey Bay Aquarium Research Institute, MBARI, in the fall of 1998, working across biological and chemical oceanography research labs. He was awarded a NASA New Investigator Grant during his postdoctoral research, and appreciating the strong science and engineering collaborations underlying MBARI, John found his career home, where he remains as senior research specialist. Perhaps a serendipitous prelude to this talk, John and team's work was recently showcased in a San Francisco Chronicle article. And John, it's exciting to have you here to share what you and team are discovering and exciting new insights into whale behavior and communication. So thank you so much for being here, and I will hand it over to you.
Thank you, Susan. And thank you, ACS, SF. It's true, I went to MBARI for a 2-year job 24 years ago. And it's been a wonderful place to live here along the Central California coast, raised both our sons here. We really love it. And the opportunities to do interdisciplinary ocean research in Monterey Bay are just really unparalleled. So yeah, well, let me share some scientific information with you. All right. And I want to start with acknowledging my friend, Bryant Austin, who took this photograph of a humpback whale fluke at the edge of the ocean and atmosphere. He entitled it "A Mother Listens." And we know in life that listening can teach us so much. And that's extremely true in the ocean, because marine mammals and other animals use sound for their essential life activities, communicating, foraging, navigating, reproducing, socializing. And that means by listening, by recording and analyzing sound, we open a window into their lives, a window that's somewhat challenging to have other ways because they spend so much time out of sight. And yet, as you'll see in what I talk about, it's really essential to integrate different methods of observing these wonderful life forms and to build on the strengths of each method of observation. So I'd like to start with acknowledgements. This type of interdisciplinary research really does require people with a variety of specializations and talents and technologies. There's a team at MBARI in operations, engineering, and science who work together on this ocean soundscape project. And we have quite a few research collaborators within the region and along the greater West Coast, all of them listed there. And these people specialize in areas, for example, placing temporary animal-borne tags on the backs of whales so that we can view the world from the perspective of the animals and observe their behavior. Or people who model how sound is transmitted through the ocean, and therefore, at the location we're listening, how far away could that animal be and we could still hear it? Gives us that context for where we're listening. People who measure stable isotopes in the skin of whale biopsy samples to tell us about what they've been eating. So it's really a wonderful group of people here I want to acknowledge and thank. So here we have the symphony. And we're going to listen in on the symphony in a minute, but let's first take a look at it visually. This is a spectrogram. It's a visual representation of sound energy as a function of time on the horizontal. We've got 34 minutes here, and frequency or pitch on the vertical. The intensity of sound is represented by color. So warmer colors, more sound energy at a given time, and frequency or pitch. And along the right here, we've got highlighted the approximate ranges of frequency spanned by songs from 3 different baleen whale species, bluefin and humpback. The lowest frequency sounds below our lower limit of hearing, in fact, are from blue whales, way down here near 10 hertz. The upper limit of our hearing is about 20 hertz. And then here are these thin, narrow pulses are from fin whales. And now we're getting into higher harmonics of the blue whale calls. The fundamental is down here, and there's a series of harmonics. We key off of this third harmonic of the blue whale B call for many of our studies because it carries the most energy. It's the best, it's the most information rich for us. And then as we move up around 100 hertz, and above, we have humpbacks covering really a vast frequency range. They can even have harmonics above our upper limit of hearing, these massive animals. But what we're looking at here is maybe 100 to about 8,000 hertz, and it's filled with the song of a humpback whale. And we'll examine, the structure of song a bit. But, I just wanted to kind of illustrate first, the song sheet that probably just a few individuals were filling the ocean with this sound during this half hour. We are in a really wonderful place to listen. I'm trying to get this bar out of my view. Excuse me. It's there we go. Get this out of the way. If I could even minimize it, that'd be better. Okay, we'll live with it. We are here. We're recording just south of San Francisco Bay, just outside Monterey Bay on a geological feature called Smooth Ridge. It's on the continental slope, about 900 meters water depth. So fairly deep. And it's a 52-kilometer cable that connects it to Moss Landing, where our institute is. And really, any ecology we're going to study along the west coast of the US, a key process is coastal upwelling, where winds out of the northwest blowing along shore toward the equator drive the surface waters away from the coast because of the rotation of the earth. And what happens is deep, cold water rises to the surface, which you see here in these plumes of relatively cool water colored purple, blue, in contrast to the offshore waters that are a good bit warmer in reds and yellows. And this cold water is responsible for not only the invention of the wetsuit up in here, O'Neill, but also fertilization of the ecosystem. That deep water is rich in nutrients. It fertilizes the growth of microscopic algae, which feeds the rest of the food web ultimately. So it is a phenomenal location to listen because it is so productive and so biodiverse. We have so many species of marine mammals that use this sanctuary as essential habitat. So the time period I'm going to focus on for the first study is 2015 into 2021. We started recording back here. And what you're looking at in these bars is, if you see a red bar, it means that the ocean was relatively less productive. And where you see blue bars, it was relatively more productive, meaning this coastal upwelling was strong, fertilizing growth of plankton. So what we're looking at is, just for reference, a time period here where we started out with unusually warm conditions, the so-called warm blob, where the Northeast Pacific was exceptionally warm and nutrient supply was weakened and productivity was lessened. And we had actually also had a phenomenal toxic algal bloom along much of the Northeast Pacific during this year. And then things approached closer to normal, flip-flopped once, and then finally we flipped back into a positive, highly productive regime. So how do we listen? Let's start with the technology. It is a hydrophone. You can fit it in your hand. It's sitting at the top of this pipe here. And this pipe has 3 legs. It's just a tripod that we're going to sit on the seafloor when we get down there with the ROV. And this green this green cable is an extension cord. So we can plug into the deep sea observatory. So, here you are at 900 meters water depth under crushing pressure and corrosive salt water. You have a sensitive, electronic device, a hydrophone, and you just plug it in and it works. Okay. It was working. Interesting. Now I'm going to do. Okay, I actually am going to show you that video because it's fun. And here it is. All right, so here we are flying down with the ROV. There's the hydrophone at the top, and Science Port 8 is where we just plug in this sensitive device. Here's the extension cord, which gets unfurled, uncoiled, and then 70 meters away from the main node, we set this hydrophone on the seafloor where it's been for more than 7 years now. Okay. All right, so we'll go back here. And now let's listen in on the symphony. Here's an excerpt from a humpback whale song, a phrase. And, you know, a humpback whale song can go on for more than 30 minutes. And they have tremendous structure in their songs, but it's a little bit challenging for us to hear that structure because the song structure unfolds slowly. It unfolds on whale time. So let's listen to a song from a humpback whale at an accelerated speed. This is at 8 times normal speed. So it's a lot easier to hear the structure when we play it back fast. We can hear, of course, the individual song units, how they're arranged together in phrases, how phrases are repeated a number of times before transitioning to a new theme, and so on. Blue whale song. Well, it's even harder to represent blue whale song for you in this remote format because their vocalizations are such low frequency. So if we were together in the same room, I would bring a capable speaker, a subwoofer, that can translate these low frequency sounds into air movement. So you would feel it in your chest more than you would hear it, and the walls might shake. So since we're not in that format, let's just speed up a short segment of blue whale song to 10 times normal speed. And blue whales can mix up these 3 notes in different ways, in different songs, but not nearly as complex as the compositions of a humpback whale. Now, fin whale, this is going to be a little bit hard to hear probably. The playback speed here is 4 times normal speed, but the energy of their calls is such low frequency that the pitch is still not raised all that much. You'll probably hear these higher pitch doublets better than these lower pitched ones. Okay, so now we know, we have a sense of what song is. I should clarify that it is only the males of each species that produce these structured repeated sequences of sound that we call song. And that dates back to the earliest descriptions of humpback whale song by Payne and others. So what we're looking at here now is 6 years of detection of this particular type of sound produced by these 3 species: blue whales, fin whales, and humpback whales. And for every day, you'll see a dot if there was song present, if we detected it in our recordings that day. And we're going from the 3rd quarter of 2015 to the 3rd quarter of 2021. And right away, what you can see is that each species has a seasonal acoustic presence with the song, rising in the fall, falling in the winter. The intensity can vary from year to year, and that could be due to the number of animals present and how much they're singing and how close they are to our hydrophone. And you also maybe get a sense that the blue whales might start earliest, followed by fin whales, and followed by humpback whales. there is that, and when you look at all the years together, that is true. They do have a slight offset in their seasonal timing, and fin whales also are present later into springtime months than blue whales. But what's important is that the rise of song detection is a result of the animals beginning the behavior, the song behavior. They're here in the summer, but they're not singing. And then song goes away each year because the animals migrate away from our hydrophone. They're still singing their hearts out on the breeding grounds. And right away with humpbacks here on the bottom, what I want you to notice is the apparent trend. Seems like we're getting more and more intense through the time series here. So now let's look at that on an annual basis. And let's stay with the humpbacks. They're shown here in black. And each year is represented by a single number, the acoustic presence, the percent of days. And we can see humpbacks just pretty much continuously rising throughout this 6-year period, from 34% of the days in the beginning to 76% of the days by the end of this time series. A major increase in this behavior. During the first 3 years, blue whales here also increased, as did fin whales. All 3 species showed the same trend. And then after the 3rd year, while humpbacks continued to rise, blue whales dropped for a couple of years before rising, and fin whales oscillated in their acoustic presence. Another key distinction of humpback whales, besides this continuous steady trend upward, is an increase in the proportion of their song that occurs during the day. So oftentimes from tag data, we can see that the animals are very busy during the day foraging and they will sing more at night. But what this shows is that humpbacks were distinct not only in a steady trend, but also the only species that exhibited an increasing proportion of daytime song. Here in these monthly bars, you can also see that, with daytime song being the tip of the iceberg back in 2015-16, to much greater proportion by the end of this time series. More song during the day, and that will come back in a minute, that observation. So the simplest hypothesis, let's start with humpbacks, because they're the only species for which we have adequate visual data, which I'll describe here. Happy Whale, Ted Cheeseman, has this phenomenal database of photos to which ecotourism and science contribute. So during our 6-year study period, there are, in the Happy Whale database, 17,584 identifications of identifications of humpback whales. Many of them identified many times. In fact, Fran was identified the most in this entire data set. And Ted provided this lovely photo of Fran's fluke, and I put it into the draft of the paper just a few weeks before Fran was killed by a ship strike. And so with this unique data, we're able to answer the question, is there evidence that positive trend in humpback whale song is due to an increasing local population of whales? More song from more animals. And the key advantage of this data is the identity of the individual, because relevant to how much sound we record is how many individuals are present. Not just how many times is a humpback whale sighted, but how many individuals does that represent? And that's where we can distill this massive data set into the daily number of unique observations, and look at the distribution of the daily number of unique identifications of humpback whales. We can see them during the first 4 years climbing, consistent with the trend in song. And if we do the statistics, they are significant increases. That's what these arrow triangles indicate. However, between years 4 and 5, that metric decreased. And between years 5 and 6, it didn't change. So if we go back to our trend, we would say that during these 4 years, it is possible that an increasing local abundance of humpback whales contributed to this song trend. But during these last 2 years, doesn't look supported. And we examined this data in multiple ways, withholding some data sets because of a distinction or just it's very robust, comes out the same answer regardless of how we treat these data. So if it's not those, especially those last 2 years, if the explanation is not a larger number of whales locally producing more song, what could change the behavior of the animals? For example, that increasing proportion of song during the daytime, what could contribute to that? Well, let's dive into foraging ecology. And all 3 species, bluefin and humpback, utilize krill as an important food source. This is the remotely operated vehicle's eye dropping into a swarm of krill along the edge of the continental shelf, the shelf break. You can see the tremendous density of krill. And, these whales are able to open their mouths and their pleated undersides can expand such that they take in a gulp of water that weighs more than their own body, at least with blue whales. So if they come across dense patches like this, they're going to be very efficient at gaining the energy that they need. And so NOAA, the California Current Integrated Ecosystem Assessment Group, has regular surveys every year, every spring, summer, at all of these sampling locations along the Central California coast, all these red dots. So they get a snapshot of what the forage conditions for the entire ecosystem, because krill, anchovy, sardine, other species, they're important to more than baleen whales, of course. But with this data, we can begin to examine how the availability of food would affect the species of whales differently. So let's start with the first 3 years when all 3 species of whales increased their acoustic presence. During those first 3 years, you can see in green and purple, anchovy and sardine, forage fish remained depleted this entire time. However, krill, which began the time series with a negative anomaly, depleted, moved toward normal, and then to a positive anomaly by the 3rd year. So the idea here is that more abundant food resources make it easier for these animals to meet their daily energy requirements through foraging and through greater health and time and energy for song behavior that may be contributing to that trend we saw in all 3 species. Then look what happened in the latter 3 years. During the 4th year, all of these forage species had relatively abundant, but then krill became negative again, negative anomalies, so depleted, and forage fish became sort of the dominant prey resource. And this is particularly important for humpback whales because they, unlike blue and fin whales, have the ability to readily switch prey over to forage fish when the availability is greater. And forage fish pack more energy. So if a humpback whale foraging in abundant fish conditions would much more efficiently be able to meet its energy requirements and be healthier, have more time and energy for song behavior. And now in this last element here, these were samples taken by John Kalamikidis, Cascadia, and analyzed by Callie Turner and Allison Fleming. And it's really amazing that we can actually see in the small skin samples from these whales what they've been eating. And so let's just look at 2 contrasting years, 2017, 2019. In 2017, krill were abundant and fish were depleted. In 2019, the opposite was true. And let's look at that first from the perspective of humpback whales in black. what we see right away is this much larger ellipse in 2017 versus 2019. And further, all the data points are kind of pushed to the upper right, which is consistent with a diet dominated by fish. Whereas during 2017, when both krill and fish were, I should say, krill were abundant and fish were depleted, humpback whales had this, this much larger ellipse that overlapped with blue whale foraging on krill. So this isotopic signature from the skin of the animals really is consistent with the available forage for humpback whales. And for blue whales, in contrast, look at how the ellipse expands. And instead of meaning a more diverse diet because they only eat krill, it means they were probably ranging farther to get the krill that they need in this second year when krill were depleted. So this is the type of data we try to piece together to understand the complex lives of these animals. Now, everything we've looked at so far is from an omnidirectional hydrophone. It records pressure from a sound wave that comes from any direction. And that's wonderful. You can characterize the presence of a species, and that's really important information. However, what if we could get a little more information? Not just, I heard a blue whale, but that sound from the blue whale came from over here. And with colleagues from the Naval Postgraduate School, Paul Leary, Kevin Smith, and John Joseph, Tatiana Margolina, we're using both a unique technology on the Mars Observatory, cabled observatory, and modeling to tell us how far away could a blue whale be in any direction. And we'd still be able to have enough signal to noise to point to where that call came from, to determine it's a bearing to that call from Mars. And when we, this ability to point to where the call came from, it doesn't tell us how far away the animal is. But when we project that onto the map, knowing the bounds within which we can hear these whales loud enough, then we begin to be able to place the animals in a spatial context, in the context of the ecosystem and its processes. So what you're looking at here, this white dot, is actually a GPS location from the back of a whale because it had a suction cup tag attached to it by Jeremy Goldbogen's lab. Dave Cade, James Fallbush, and others doing this amazing work. And that tag was recording calls from the animal. It had a little accelerometer on the, which if it vibrates with the sound the animal produces, it's a strong indicator that you just recorded the animal that you tagged. It made that sound. And so what we found is while this animal was over here singing, we could match up the cadence of its song and its surface breathing intervals and say, yeah, we know that what we heard on the cabled observatory matched what this animal was singing. And then we took the acoustic method, this acoustic vector sensor, particle motion sensor, directional hydrophone, it's called different things, but it told us, it pointed to the whale. So it convinced us, hey, this works for blue whales. And now we can use years of data to examine how blue whales move through this complex ecosystem. Now, blue whales have something to move for, and that is food, the krill. You've seen that video of how densely concentrated the krill can be. Well, it turns out Kelly Benoit Bird at MBARI, an acoustical oceanographer, and a phenomenal one at that, she led this research published in 2019 where what we learned is that the forage species, including anchovies and krill, respond very strongly to that wind-driven upwelling. And so for example, here's a time period when upwelling was relatively weak. The Monterey Bay is relatively warm. That cold water is not flowing in from Point Año Nuevo. Whereas later, Here's the upwelling has spun up. This cold plume is flowing into the bay and cooling things off. And the transect here, 15-kilometer transect, is slicing through this upwelling plume. And if we contrast relaxation with wind-driven upwelling, here's what we see. And I'm going to focus just on krill here. Here's relaxation with the animals distributed fairly diffusely versus upwelling where the krill are very concentrated in patches. And if you were a blue whale, you would want to find the places and times where your food has become so concentrated that the very same effort you make to lunge, close around that krill, squeeze out the water and get your food, you'd find these because your foraging would become so much more efficient. And so from this study, we hypothesized that blue whales would track the coastal upwelling plumes within which their food is aggregated. And that directional hydrophone gave us the data we needed to examine that. So here we are, again, listening from the cabled observatory. These dashed lines are the bearings to these coastal upwelling centers in our region. These are places where upwelling tends to originate and from which these cold plumes flow, typically equatorward. So here's a plume coming from Point Año Nuevo and flowing into Monterey Bay. Here's an upwelling plume starting at Point Sur and flowing south. The thing is, though, that this black contour, which defines how far away we can hear the blue whales with sufficient intensity, only the Point Año Nuevo plume is within our listening domain. So if we're going to look at the relationship between blue whales and upwelling plumes, we need to focus on this upwelling plume here. And so here's what we, if we take 2 years of blue whale song seasons, 2019-20 and 2020-21, and we look at the bearing from Mars, west, north, east, south, what we see is these peaks at the bearings to the upwelling centers. You know, over 400 hours of song calling captured in this summary, and the peaks are where the upwelling centers are located. But what you'll notice is that the peak at Point Sur is much sharper and narrower. And the reason for that, we think, is that we're only hearing the northern end of that plume. If we could hear farther out, we would hear, or if we were listening from a different location, we would perhaps be able to hear how blue whales move in response to this upwelling center. But for the rest of this talk, I'm just going to focus in on this upwelling plume. So now, that plume, of course, comes here from Año Nuevo and flows into the bay. So by the time it gets into the northeast quadrant of this call reception domain, right? Here's our northeast quadrant with, well, by the time it gets into here, it's actually in the bay and along important foraging habitat for blue whales along the continental shelf break here and the canyon edge. We also have a mooring here that can monitor when that upwelling is present, when that cold, salty water enters the bay from upwelling. So now let's look at time series from listening here, watching the ocean here. And so what we have here for late October into mid-December of 2020 is the total amount of calling by blue whales in the northern hemisphere of the call domain. That's this region here, and the northeast, just this portion here. And then the northeast percentage is just northeast over north. And what you see are these periods of elevated call activity coming from this area where the upwelling plumes come into the bay. And sure enough, if you look at water density, that's what this is, water density, more dense, deeper, lighter toward the surface. But look at how these lines outcrop to the surface. That's how you know that upwelling has entered the bay. That cold, dense water is up at the surface. So here's a single upwelling plume in the bay, and the whales are in the bay. Then winds relax, the water density contours drop, then they come back up. And sure enough, so does the percentage of calling from the bay. And if we trace this ocean circulation back, we can be very definite. These purple bars show upwelling strength, coastal upwelling transport index. So we have this sharp peak in upwelling. There's a time lag between when the winds peak and when ocean circulation responds. So a little bit later than the peak, we see the upwelling plume in the bay. And look at this, these black circles represent the area scattering in patches, meaning how densely concentrated are the food patches. These are observations from Mars. So we see the prey field following the wind, the ocean circulation following the wind, the whales following the wind. And just to put that onto a map, we have here 4 time periods, and the first relaxation period, 22 October to 6 November, is here. First upwelling, second relaxation, second upwelling. And what you see is when the winds are relaxed, the animals are spending most of their time in this offshore domain, 46% of the call activity, 65% of the call activity. And this area is where shipping lanes transit right through their habitat. They move clockwise around the compass when upwelling kicks in, with nearly half of all the calling coming from the bay during these times. And I wanted to highlight this work by James Fallbush and others, just published. These massive animals have evolved for a very long time, millions of years longer than we have, to use sound and to find the food they need in a very patchy, dynamic ocean. And what James recently published here shows, he's focused in here now on the Santa Barbara Channel, where some of the tags he and others deployed were able to track these animals in relation to the circulation features of the ocean, surface circulation features. And the point I just want to make here is how this animal is very actively foraging along the edge of one of these dynamic circulation features, aggregative features. And that's what we think they're doing in these upwelling plumes, is they're able to zero in on these features through their senses and through their knowledge. So now that was blue whales. What can this directional hydrophone tell us about the relationship between blue whales and fin whales? I mean, they're fairly closely related, and they are the 2 largest animal species on the planet. They both rely on krill, but how do they share this habitat? So what you're looking at here is 2019, when we saw earlier that sharp peak pointing toward the Poinsett upwelling center. That's what you're looking at here, is as a function of bearing relative to Mars, west, south, east, north, and time, August through December 2019, the total amount of calling minutes per day in each 15-degree directional bin for that day. And we can see right away, looking at this distribution, that during this year, we were persistently hearing blue whales from this bearing just east of south. And in contrast, fin whales were predominantly just west of south, south out to west, roughly. And of course, when we sum this up over the whole 5-month period, here is what we see, the offset peaks, showing that they do partition the habitat to a degree. However, there's this time period during late October when fin whales moved into the east and north for about a week. Similarly, blue whales also moved to the east and north, and unlike fin whales, they kind of stayed up there. There was much greater persistent presence in this directional domain. So what was happening in late October that might cause this simultaneous change in the habitat occupancy of both species? Well, just to emphasize that shift, what you're looking at here in the top is the call rate in hours per day, gray bars, and then the black circles represent the percent in Monterey Bay. And this right here defines the domain of being in the bay. And you can see there's that shift by the blue whales that persisted. And if we draw a line at the beginning of that shift, what we can see is, well, it preceded this major change in salinity, freshening of the ocean, decrease in salinity, warming of the upper ocean as these warm surface waters extend deeper into the water column. These major hydrographic changes occurred days following this shift by the whales. However, circulation was changing right when the whales were moving. And this circulation is measured right here at the mouth of the bay. And what you can see in red, what this means is that the alongshore currents, positive, they became positive or poleward toward the north. And they extend to 150 meters, 200 meters, the depth of the shelf break where the whales forage. So this change in circulation could certainly have an impact on the whales' foraging habitat and their behavior. And the ocean change in ocean conditions followed that change in circulation. And what's important is, we often think about how the winds drive circulation in this region, and indeed they do, but the winds really weren't changing at this time. These are wind vectors, and their length indicates their strength, and the direction they're pointing is the direction the wind would be blowing. And so these northwesterly winds out of the northwest toward the southeast, that's your typical upwelling conditions. And there was a brief interruption in upwelling, but no major change in winds like you get later in the season with storms. So this doesn't look like a wind-driven circulation. It looks like something else. So for that, we can turn to this coastal high-frequency radar. These are stations on land, on the coast, that can measure surface ocean currents. That's what James Fallbush used in that highlight I showed earlier, with some fairly advanced calculations from that data. Here I'm just showing the surface current vectors, where here we are in late October with your typical upwelling flow southward, offshore, particularly around the Point Sur Plume as well. So that's what we would expect from typical upwelling conditions. Well, look what happened by October 25th. Currents reversed, starting in the south near Point Sur, which is where the blue whales were mostly located, at least the ones that we're calling. And that poleward flow, that northward flow, expanded and intensified, affecting the whole bay. So again, just an example of how, in order to understand what the whales are doing and why they're doing it, we need all these diverse sources of data to interpret the ecosystem. And now I would like to check my time, actually. How am I doing on time? I want to highlight work by Will A. Strike, who was a student at Stanford Hopkins Marine Station and is now a postdoc with us, fortunately for us. So Will began looking at blue whale sound produced by blue whales, and he was integrating what you can learn from a hydrophone sitting on the seafloor for 6 years with what you can learn from putting temporary suction cup attached tags on the backs of whales, working with Jeremy Goldbogen's lab at Stanford. And this is a really powerful integration because it tells you, the hydrophone tells you about what the local population is doing acoustically, and the tags tell you about what individuals are doing. And each of those have their strengths, and understanding each benefits from the other. So what what you've seen before is this song index is, here's an average of 6 years of the typical daily song index, where they're not singing in the summer. It begins by July with blue whales, steadily rises to a peak in November, and then falls off as the animals migrate to lower latitudes for the breeding season. Now what you're looking at is the night to day ratio on the bottom here. And a value of 1 just means they're singing about the same amount or intensity day and night. But when it rises above 1, it means they're singing more at night than during the day. But what we see is this rise in the proportion of nighttime song activity, dropping off later in the fall until actually the median here, this bar, drops below 1. So they're actually, as a population, singing more during the day by the end of this. So what Will and others did, this is Dave Cade, I believe, applying a suction cup attached tag to the back of the blue whale and with a carbon fiber pole. They're just phenomenal talent to be able to do that. And so with that data from the tag, Will could learn things like this. He could see during the daytime, in white here, the animal just going between the surface and the water column. And while it's down here at depth, it's each one of these blue dots is a feeding lunge. It's opening up, taking in water and krill, filtering out the water. Then it'll come back up to the surface to breathe, and so on throughout the day. Then we get toward dusk and we start to see song calls and feeding and song calls. Then by the time we get into the night, it's just singing, no longer foraging. So Will took this type of data, in fact, 664 hours of it, from 15 tag deployments. And he showed, sure enough, that the song call rate during the fall was greater during night and dusk and dawn than during the day, just as we saw in that individual tag. In contrast, the feeding rate was kind of the opposite, feeding more during the day than during night and dawn and dusk. So here's an example of a tag. Cascadia, John Kalambakitis et al. Placed this tag on a blue whale, and it stayed on for about a month. So they were able to track this animal from Northern California all the way down to Baja. And what you're looking at, this line here, is latitude of the animal. So it was staying up here in the north for a while before heading south, migrating south. Now these circles represent the feeding lunges per day. And we see, the size of the circle represents how many feeding lunges per day. And the color represents whether it's happening more during the day or during the night. And so what you see is this foraging is happening mostly in red, which is daytime foraging. Blue triangles, nighttime song. So they're partitioning their daytime and nighttime activities largely. Then when the animal moves into migrating south, we start seeing, well, number one, we see no more feeding. The animal is just continuously moving on its way, largely, and singing both day and night. But in fact, a bit more during the day with this red color. That's what that red color indicates. So now when we go back, take this individual perspective and go back to our long-term average pattern, the local population, we can see that this is a transitional period from foraging to migration. That's why we hear this shift in the population from more during the night to more during the day. And then Will took that a step further in his next study, showing how the timing of blue whale migration from this foraging habitat to breeding habitat can vary by as much as 4 months from year to year. So what you're looking at on the vertical axis here is the behavioral transition. When do they transition to their breeding migration, leaving California? And this is the day of the year. So this span is about 4 months. And what we can see is there's a strong relationship between when they migrate, and basically what this represents is the biological productivity of the ecosystem. How well are they being fed by primary productivity, which reaches them through the food web, through these forage species? So really strong, clear relationship. And it shows how sensitive these animals are, not just to the instantaneous movement of a coastal upwelling plume or a dynamic feature, but to how the ecosystem state for that year. They're so attuned with their environment. I want to highlight this study also led by Dave Cade, who's at Stanford now. And Dave really beautifully brought together these complex observations of animals that were tagged, the forage species using active acoustic sensing, environmental data. And for the Monterey Bay part of this study, the research team came across these 2 blue whale so-called supergroups, meaning dense aggregations of blue whales. Picture 40 blue whales in a 1 kilometer radius. That's what they observed right here. And notice that these blue whale supergroups are right at the head of these small scale finger canyons incising the upper slope. And here is a drone-based image of 4 blue whales headed for this spot where all the whales seem to be aggregating. They were aggregating. And the question is, what was happening? And why were all these whales coming together? Well, in Dave's research, he showed how these areas up along the shelf break and near these canyon heads were extremely favorable habitats for blue whale foraging. Very thick, evenly distributed, dense krill swarms, which is ideal for this lunge feeding behavior, for them to rapidly acquire a lot of energy. And what Will did in this study with our hydrophone data is what he looked at a certain type of call from blue whales, a D call. And he found that we were recording very anomalously high rates of those D calls before the blue whales came together and during the time they were together. So the idea here is the whales may be collectively sensing this massive habitat, patchy. It's hard to find these dense krill swarms, but if one of your species finds them and sounds off, as Dave called it, like an acoustic signpost, here's the place, come on over. And when your voice travels 100 miles, you can do that. You can call your friends. And then the next time you need a meal, you might hear your conspecific alerting you to a foraging opportunity somewhere else to the benefit of the entire population. So I want to sort of close with this concept of, sound in the ocean. We've already mentioned sound is absolutely essential to the lives of these whale species and many other animal species in the ocean. And I think sound is a wonderful way to connect to their lives, not only scientifically, but in other ways.
Alexa, ask Ocean Soundscape to play Humpback Whale.
Here is a 6-minute 43 seconds recording of a single humpback whale song. They can repeat their songs for many hours.
Cool fact. There it is. That's so cool. Oh, I'm scared. Listen. How does it make that sound? Oh my gosh.
So we do have an Alexa skill for accessing the soundscape, the live stream, and pre-recorded clips of different species. And these 2 are my friend's daughters who we were trying out the Alexa skill on, and it was a hit. So before we focused on bluefin and humpback whales, but let's hear a few more voices from coastal California waters. Gray whales. We hear sperm whales. We hear orcas. Pacific white-sided dolphins. And listening 3,000 feet below the surface, we hear sea lions barking. We do want researchers around the world to be able to access and use these data. It's a fairly large collection at this point, about 175 terabytes. And so we did make all, thanks to collaboration with AWS Open Data, we made all of these data openly accessible together with analysis tools. And, you know, it's working. The first month we checked on access to these data, it was in April of this year. There was 2 petabytes of access from 11 countries. So it is getting out there. A high school student used our recordings to carry one of our analyses of shipping noise during COVID, how it got quieter during COVID because of the economic downturn and reduced shipping activity. It carried that years ahead by using this open source data. We do, if you ever want to just hear what's on our hydrophone at any time, we have a live stream. It's actually about 15 minutes to 20 minutes behind real time because we don't interrupt the file that's being recorded. And if the live stream is boring, which by the way, in fall, it gets very interesting. This is a good time to listen. But if it's boring, you know, just background hiss, there's a recording library. You can listen to different pre-recorded sounds. And we do have an exhibit at the Sanctuary Exploration Center in Santa Cruz across from the wharf. And that has a subwoofer there, so you can really feel the low frequency sounds produced by large whales, earthquakes. And I'll end with a humpback whale sending us off and be glad to answer questions. So Susan, if should I go to the Q&A?
Yes, I didn't want to interrupt listening to this humpback whale, but but
I know,
yeah,
it's hard.
yeah, no, and thank you for all those resources and making them open source. I know I took some screenshots of that, so I bet others will be visiting as well. So yeah, boy, John, thank you so much. There's so much to absorb here. And yeah, well, I know I have a few questions, but there are some questions in the Q&A. So
yeah,
yeah.
I'll start with Timothy's question.
Okay, do you want to stop the even though we love hearing this? Yeah, maybe that's better. Okay.
Yeah, I know I'm trained. I can actually let it be in the background, but it's hard. Yeah. It's hard. It's so you just want to listen.
Yeah, yeah. I want to say too, I gave my dog a bone at the beginning, and as soon as you played the first one, she came bounding up to understand what's going on. So I don't animal to animal, but yeah. So yeah, you see the Q&A, and that's a pretty interesting question. So go for it.
Okay.
Yeah, Timothy Vogel asks, he is going to become a naturalist aboard Lindblad expeditions in the Channel Islands. And he asks can you review the delayed implantation cycle in whales whose gestation is longer than 12 months? What are the triggers and dynamics that allow the synchronization of annual seasons with a cycle that is offset from that time series? Even 2-year cycles in a 15-month gestation finds a 20 to 30 offset. I've read about photo periods being part of the triggering dynamic. Yeah, that's a scientist, I think, asking that.
Yeah. Well, you know, that's not something I study. I don't measure hormones in whales, but people like Ari Friedlander do. And, you know, there is evidence from sampling humpbacks in the Pacific that male hormone levels do vary in a way that would be consistent with influencing song behavior. But yeah, reproductive ecology of whales is not something I can speak for, Timothy. Sorry, but I hope that out on that cruise you can find your answers.
In fact, John, you mentioned something, if I got this right, that it's only males that sing. Is that right? Or...
Yeah. There's pretty solid evidence that it is the males that sing, produce these structured sequences of sound.
Wow.
So, you know, it's, you know, traditionally, and since that behavior is so predominant on the breeding grounds, it's naturally been interpreted to be relevant to breeding ecology, demonstration of fitness, whether that's to mates or competitors. So that is a common interpretation, and it's well supported. And yet I appreciate number one, a fact. You know, we're hearing song from humpback whales almost all year, except during the intense foraging of summer. So, you know, is it just about reproductive behavior? That would tend to say no. And there are ideas out there which I appreciate. A person who works in neuroscience, cognitive behavior, Eddie Mercado, has proposed a model in which we can consider how sound can be used by humpbacks, for example, to help them perceive their environment. And there are some fascinating examples across the animal kingdom of how everything from the relative intensity difference between a primary sound and its echo can tell an animal about the proximity of the other animal that produced the sound. So, you know, there's a lot we don't know because it's so hard to understand what their lives are like and how they sense and how their senses have evolved and how they can process that tremendous amount of acoustic information.
Yeah, nice. Okay, Jody Frediani asks, we know that humpbacks tend to hang in the water head down at a 45-degree angle, more or less, when they sing. Do we have any idea what position blues and fins are in when they vocalize?
Yeah, it's those tags that we saw being placed on the backs of the animals. They have the ability to sense, they have accelerometers, they have the ability to sense the orientation and movement of the animal. And, you know, that's a great question. And I've looked at the tag data only to validate that I can point to where a whale called from and to, you know, to show how the calling relates to their diving behavior. But I would have to look at the data further to see if they have a similar orientation when they are singing. I love that question. I'm going to have to find out the answer. Thank you, Jody.
Yeah, and you probably know Jody as one of the preeminent wildlife and marine mammal photographer. So
Yeah.
they're based in Santa Cruz, so good. Okay, here's another one. Thomas asks, could increase increased night song, low frequency decalls be used to mechanically stimulate bioluminescence of krill and used as visual cues for blue whales of dense swarms?
Yeah, fascinating idea. You know, we wondered, and we are testing now with Will's A Strike's postdoc project, where we've got a deployment called Blue Whale Observatory, where we're bringing together all the observations we need in one place: predator, prey, and environment. So what we've wondered, Kelly Benoit Bird suggested this, that, you know, we got to remember the forage species behave, they respond. And it is possible that they respond to the vocalizations themselves by aggregating, you know, and so we're going to try to get a window into that possibility that acoustic behavior of the whale could actually herd krill. Now, bioluminescence of krill, I'm not sure. Bioluminescence is very widespread in the ocean. Steve Haddock at MBARI, I think, found that some 70%, and Severine Martini, when she did her postdoc, found that high percentage of animals bioluminesce. But I don't know if Euphausia superba or Thycenoessa spinifera, the two krill species that are dominant in this region, I don't know if they're bioluminescent. I don't know. I don't think so. So I'll ask Steve.
Good. One question I have, you know, with human voices, of course, every voice is unique. Do you have any sense of that with individual whales?
Yeah, that is a common question. And if you could perfectly record the sounds produced by each whale, you know, you would have a start at answering that. The issue, though, is if you're recording, your recorder is sitting in one location, the very same whale will sound very differently, can sound very differently, depending on where it is relative to your receiver. So if you were just analyzing the nature of the sound, you'd say, oh, that's very different. I wonder if that's from a different animal. But it could just be that the acoustic path between the animal and the receiver has changed the sound differently from different locations. So we have that basic challenge.
Got it. Okay, let's see. This is a good question from Yvonne. Is it possible that the shipping lanes could be shifted away from the ever more concentrating whale activity in the current shipping lanes? Is that being discussed as a possibility? I think there's a lot going on that, and you're probably close to it as well. So
yeah, thanks for that question. It's you know, this is a very important topic, and in order to make big decisions like that, management decisions where you might start with voluntary speed reductions or mandatory speed reductions if necessary, or you might reroute shipping during a period of the year that is critical for the whale's foraging activity and lives here. We see this because this is the first time we've ever demonstrated that this acoustic vector sensor can work for studying blue whales. And the first time we've ever tried to study their movement ecology. We see this paper as the starting point for your question and activity in that direction. You know, resource managers need solid science to base their decisions on, and that's what we aim for.
Yeah, good. Yeah, it was very sad, the particular humpback that you identified early on in your presentation, that you had heard her call, I think you said, and then subsequently she was hit by a ship. Yeah,
that hurts.
It really does. And I might make a mention now that in November, for our November talk on November 15th, we have our 3 research grantees, award grantees, that will be presenting their research. And pretty much all of it is related to human impact, specifically ship strikes, and fishnet entanglement. So I would urge everyone interested in that to mark your calendars. Good.
Yeah.
So
thanks for that, because you remind me, Susan, that Andrew DeVogler, who's the research director of Monterey Bay Natural Marine Sanctuary, he's in this collaboration with us. And, you know, it's not just about shipping lanes, it's about entanglement and fishing gear, particularly for humpbacks. So this type of technology can also help us in that regard, with regard to dynamic management.
right. And while we're on the topic of, you know, the shipping and the noise level, do we have, I guess that could almost be another variable that you could start to track at some point, which would be the impact of, you know, noise or on whales, on their communication.
Yeah, there have been a number of studies that, you know, consistently just show that the communication range of whales shrinks greatly when there's a lot of continuous background noise from shipping. They used to be able to communicate over much longer distances than they can now in many places.
Okay, let's see. This is from Doris. How often are you hearing sperm whales? Has anyone looked into their presence being aligned with any of the productivity regimes you described? I'm assuming food source.
Yeah, we hear sperm whales, I think, quite a bit. And we're, right now, Will A. Strike, the postdoc working with us, that is his top topic. And he's working hard on 7 years of data to characterize seasonal and other timescales, seasonal and interannual patterns in the acoustic presence of sperm whales. And what's great is he works also with Kelly Benoit Bird, as I mentioned. She can uniquely, with her observing approach, whether from the cabled observatory, an autonomous vehicle, an underwater vehicle, autonomous surface vehicle, a variety of platforms, remotely operated vehicle, she's mapping what the prey species are doing. So Will and Kelly will be able to characterize not just sperm whales, but, you know, food.
That sounds like perhaps a future talk.
I think so.
Yeah.
I nominate Will.
Will, okay, good. I will follow up with you. Okay, let's see. A few more here. April says, I've been listening to the hydrophone lime stream almost every day for 6 weeks. I love it. Sometimes I think I hear gray whales, but the sounds I hear don't seem to happen as frequently as they do in the sample sound on the MBARI website. Are there gray whales present in Monterey Bay and singing this time of year?
Great question. So I was sort of reading while listening. It's gray whales is the focus, yeah?
On this question, yeah.
Yeah, so we hear gray whales, yes. And my sense is they're not as active or loud at our listening location as bluefin and humpbacks are by quite a bit. So they're somewhat more of a needle in a haystack, a little bit harder to find and sift from our data. Nonetheless, Hannah Nolte is coming to work, do her graduate research at Stanford, and we'll be working with her on gray whales, and we're talking with her tomorrow. So we really do want to understand gray whales as well as we can through the same approach, through acoustic detection.
Good.
But you know, gray whales, they also have that challenge of their calves being preyed upon by orcas. And so there's, you know, this is what the word on the ocean is that they might tend to be more quiet and try to avoid areas where they can be attacked.
Yeah, good point. Okay. This is from Emily. Based on the recordings you have showed of the 3 whales, it's clear how each species has their own way of producing a song. But do whales have their own distinct song? For example, if you followed along with a tagged whale to listen to its songs, would it be the same distinct song each time it sang?
Yeah, well, I could pull up a graphic, but I guess I'll just describe it with words. You know, if you listen to an individual singing its songs, you know, because maybe it's singing a 10-minute song, but it will have a pause or not between the songs. Well, of course, it has a pause for the surface breathing interval, but even between one song and the next, you can see how the number of repetitions of phrase within a theme changes from song to song. They might add more repetitions to one theme in the first song and to a different theme in the next song. And it seems like there is a structure there, but, you know, to personify, it seems like constant improvisation.
Wow. That's
at the same time, I've heard songs that are like seemingly almost identical. So, and so apparently they can remember exact as well.
wow. Wow. So much to take in on this. It's so fascinating. This is an interesting question again from Yvonne. When the vocalizations are made available to all, is there a requirement to promise not to use them for hunting in any way? Is that, yeah.
Yeah, great question. You know, we would always want the data to promote learning and not harm. And the thing about our archive is, you know, we're posting the data continuously, but we're only posting the omnidirectional data. So the other data belongs to the Navy, and we don't post that. The omnidirectional hydrophone data can't tell you where that sound came from. So there would be no risk with regard to people zeroing in on an animal because they heard it, but rather just knowing that an animal was present close enough to be heard.
Do you have plans to place more of these hydrophones? I know you talked about the Mars location. Maybe the real question is what's next? What are you excited about, pursuing further or learning more? I mean,
yeah, we started with Mars because it's this unlimited power and communications to the deep sea. So what's great is you never run out of data storage or power for your instrument. However, we want to record in other locations, and we've begun to record in southern Monterey Bay National Marine Sanctuary, just at the head of La Cruz Canyon. That's directly inshore of the Morro Bay offshore wind area. And we just want to begin to get baseline there. What species are here? And the second standalone recorder we placed is in the proposed Chumash Heritage National Marine Sanctuary. And we have been working with PJ Webb and members of the tribal council. We went on a cruise with them. We aim to collaborate down there where a new sanctuary is being born. And we're also recording there in sea otter habitat, which we think is going to be surprisingly noisy. And that's through our collaboration with Monterey Bay Aquarium, our partner institution. And they have a long-standing vested interest in rehabilitation of sea otters and education about sea otters. So we really are happy to bring this of the soundscape of a sea otter, as a resource for people to understand their lives better.
Well, we'll definitely be looking forward to hearing more. Maybe you can even come back, at in a year or something, John. So we'll finish this up now. Well, here's just a quick one again from Yvonne. Do humpback whales duet?
I love that one too. Yeah. We certainly, that last recording I played,
yeah,
with a couple of humpbacks seemingly kind of noodling more so than singing a structured song. We could call that a duet. There are definitely two voices there, and they're interwoven. The degree to which they choreograph that, I do not know. But you sometimes have an animal singing all by itself, and it's striking. It's like, wow, that's just the same song being repeated. It seems to be the same animal. And of course, with the directional hydrophone, we can say, yeah, it keeps coming from over there. It's probably the same animal. But then at other times, there are many animals singing at the same time, and it's beyond duet into quartet, quintet, and random symphony.
Okay. Well, there's so many good questions, and so many people are saying how fantastic the presentation has been. And I guess I just want to, this is an interesting one. We will be wrapping this up, but this is from Peter. I understand songbirds can produce sounds with 20 to 70 nuances that can describe direction, distance, and type of predator hawk. The other local species of birds in that area respond and understand the threat. Do bluefin and humpback whales communicate between each other?
Wow, Peter, that's an awesome perspective on birds. Yeah, this is a great question that, again, I wish I had the knowledge to answer, but the closest we've gotten is that we know that blue whale decalls are associated with foraging. Aaron Olson, I think, and others describe that for Southern California. And we also know that here in Monterey Bay, they increase the frequency of that call when they're coming together. So that's the closest we are getting so far, for one example of blue whales, to them communicating something. And in this habitat, which is foraging habitat, they have to pack on the calories when they're here. That is the most important communication. Here's a place, my friends, where you can find the food resources you need. Come and get it.
Okay, well, I do want to tell everyone that this is being recorded, and we will be putting this up on our website. We try to do it really within a couple days. I think we could just keep this conversation going, John, but we'll have to have you back. And thank you so much for all this work and sharing all of your data and your insights and some of your conclusions to date.
Well, thank you all for your interest. It's been fun.
Good. All right. Well, let's leave it as to be continued.
To be continued.
Thanks, everyone. Hope to see you in October.
Take care, all.